Hello, everyone. It is Wednesday. We missed Ricky last Wednesday. Ricky, where were you?
I think I was in Florida by Wednesday. Traveling around doing cannabis conventions. Um,
Oh,
that's my side job.
do you enjoy that?
I'm a cannabis advocate. I enjoy it because I get to apply my astrological knowledge. I spoke on two panels, and because I know myself, I'm a ninth house Gemini Sun conjunct Jupiter, and I have Uranus opposing my Mercury, so I know if it's a panel where they just want actionable steps and conventional things, then all right, I need to shut up. And it was one of those panels, and so I shut up and I chose my spots wisely. Um, so it's this idea of being yourself. And I think being yourself is knowing when to be yourself. I think that's the big part of it because there's some situations where being yourself is not necessary, you
Mm,
know, meaning that you're not needed,
mm.
and I think part of knowing yourself is putting yourself more often than not in situations where people can appreciate what you have to offer.
Mm. Yeah, it makes me think of that
And
Eminem
so when
song.
I was in, so I knew that. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, it just makes me think of that Eminem song where he goes, "This looks like a job for me, so everybody just follow me." And it makes me think of an astrology where like there'll be times where I'll be like, "Oh, this one's a job for me." Like, like I gotta say something, but then a lot of times I should just sit there and be quiet. Anyway, sorry, go ahead. So you were being quiet even though you're amazing. And then,
No, that's it. That to me. That's
yeah, it's kind of a way, kind of a waste
well,
of
I was
your.
being, but just be aware. It was funny. Just be aware. Here's the not really, okay, because I knew that if I right to me if I wasn't aware of it, right, someone would have asked me a question and I just would have been myself, but they asked the first question and I sat back and I didn't, I let the more actionable, conventional people answer, and then I was able to add, be myself and add a little garnish on what they said, right? So it was more of I knew my crowd, I knew where I was, and I played my part. And that's what I learned on a football team. It's like we have 11 guys on the team, and everyone can't get the ball all the time, so everyone has to know, how do I play my part, and when it is my time to shine, I'm ready to do it.
Wow. It sounds like you took up the exact right amount of space, which is a very sun topic, which we will be getting the sun in a second. It makes me always think about like I'm doing a percentage calculations. I'm like, because you and I are public speakers in astrology. So it's like if I'm with 10 people in a room, I'm like, I'll be speaking 6% of the time this hour. And then like if it's just two of us, I'll be like, okay, I'll be speaking 50% of the time. Like I'm always doing the calculation of like how much space should I take up in this room and like um yeah, and in some ways when you're a talking head, it's kind of more satisfying to be in a one-on-one conversation because you get to take up more airtime and you really get to express yourself. But your presence at that conference was taking up space, even if you weren't saying something verbally. Like just you being there was a statement in and of itself.
Well, that's part of it is like recognizing that because of that what I say is going to take up more space and being aware of that. Sometimes we don't realize that everything is revolving around us and that what we do contribute is going to have carry more weight than what other people contribute. And that's a power. And I think part of leadership is knowing how to appreciate that and utilize that skill effectively.
Yeah. That being said, I have to tell you that as I've gotten older, sitting in the back of the room is like not something you could even pay me to do. Like I went to Norwalk last year and I was just being kind of crowd testing because I've been out for a few years because I was looking for, a bodyguard. Sorry to be real, but and so I went back with my bodyguard and I was like, okay, like where am I in this room? Like, and I was sitting in the back, all these rooms listening to these professors, and which is great. They were doing a great job, but I was thinking, I'll probably never come to Norwalk again and sit in the back of the room. Like that's just a waste of it. Like I don't know. There gets to a point where you are meant to be at the front of the room because that's what the crowd wants from you. It's not even what it's like what God's will is for you. It's not even your own will. it'd be like if you were on a football team and you were sitting on the bench the whole time, at some point you might be like, not the best use case of Ricky Williams. You know what I mean? So
100%. Yeah, 100%.
anyway, so we are talking about the sun, and
That's
these are
interesting
actually sun
because
topics. Huh? I
yeah,
think
I was just gonna say, part of it. This is where people sometimes have questions and they confuse the sun and the ascendant and the midheaven. You know? I think in a lot of, at least a lot of the books that I see on the market and the content, that people could confuse those three. Um,
I see what you're saying there because those are all
and there, I
points
mean,
of being visible. Like the midheaven is a career point and being visible to the public, and then the sun is a visibility point, and then the ascendant is a visibility point, is what you're saying. Yeah, that's a really good point, Ricky.
exactly, exactly. But
Huh. So, what do
yeah,
you think about that? Do you think they all have the same weight? Do you think they take up space depending on the transit to them? Like, what is your like? How would you interpret those?
so yeah, 100%. I'd say I think the first part of what you said is I'd say I think they have different weight depending on the chart. Right? Sometimes the sun is in the fifth house or the sixth house and not receiving any aspects, right? And ascendant in the midheaven, there's a bunch of planets in the first and 10th house and a lot of aspects to the ascendant in the midheaven, right? So I think each chart, there's going to be a different weighting on which is more important. And right beyond that, whichever one is being most activated by transits and progressions are the ones that are going to be most relevant currently in someone's
Yeah.
life.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is actually a really good point for anyone listening. You know, people always say, which is more important, the sun, moon, or rising, or the, and it's like really the older astrologer knows that they're cyclically important depending on the transit, and they are all, not that there's a weighting system. Some people always weight planets in the chart like this is worth 2 points and this is worth 1 point, but it really, if you have Pluto going over your ascendant, I'm sorry, but that point is a little bit activated compared to maybe your sun or something like that. So, I think that is a great point. Now we do have a fan. No, I shouldn't call them that. What should I call viewers? We have a viewer who's really excited to hear about our sun analysis in the different cultures. So we don't want to not do that. So we talked about sun last time, but now we're talking about like sun in African culture versus white culture and like how are those different or similar?
Yeah. No, so this is really, really easy. And you can think of it as like a do-it-yourself kind of package. All right. Is if I'm making an attempt to simplify the planets, right? Um, in a conversation. So it can become functional and we can go back and forth and talk about planets. Is that to me the sun is has everything to do with significance, like being somebody, right? Think of a feeling of the sun is that feeling of getting a high five, right, or a pat on the back, right, or that that smile you get from one of your parents, right, where you just kind of feel like you like light up, right? We even say, right, oh, that person, they just lit up when you said that to them. So when we have that feeling of lighting up, okay, that's the sun, right? And so if we're gonna take just talking about the sun, not even putting it into a sign or a house, just talking about the sun, we can think of different cultures, right? Have different definitions of or different ideas about significance.
Hmm.
So I imagine a culture where and it's deep in the culture, right, that a woman's role, right, that a woman's role, okay, is to be a really good cook, right? So that's the message in the overall culture, right? The things that the little girl is gonna get that pat on the back and that high five for, right? Are things, all right, when she cooks well, right? Or she does whatever, right, that culture, that gender is supposed to do, right? The feedback she's gonna get from the outside environment, right, is solar, right? Good job, right? She's gonna shine more brightly. So we can think of different cultures, different because all right, someone from a different culture, they understand their culture more than I do, right? This is why it's a DIY, it's a do it yourself of thinking in your culture, in your home, right? When you were growing up, what were the things, right, that you got seen for, right? Appreciated for, you got the high five, you got the smile, right?
Hmm.
And if we generalize that into certain cultures, we can start to see, right? So and because we have it inside the family, but we also have what we see out in the world, right? Where do we see people that look like us, right, getting the high fives, right, being appreciated? Because that's going to greatly inform, right, the kind of high fives and esteem we get from others. Okay, so a little bit more about the sun. So I think of the sun in one way, it's our self-esteem, and that self-esteem can come from the esteem of others, or it can be self-generated. And I think for me, ideally, right, the esteem we get from others, right, is an extension or amplification of the esteem we get from ourselves. I was talking to my son earlier today, who's an impressive budding astrologer, and he was we were talking about a woman friend of his who was born with the sun in Aquarius, you know, and we started talking about like that feeling of whenever she's thinking for herself, right? That there's going to be an inner sense of esteem, right? When the crowd is going one way and something in her says, oh, I don't think that's a good idea, okay? And she listens to that voice, okay? Regardless of the external consequences internally, right? A sun in Aquarius is going to feel better about themselves, right? And I imagine, right, they say, oh, it's not worth it, and they go along with the crowd, right? From the outside, right, they might get the high fives, but inside they're going to feel like, damn, I let myself down, right? Their light is going to be dim, right? Because instead of being seen and appreciated for thinking for themselves, right, they're going to be seen and appreciated for not thinking for themselves. Other people aren't going to know that, but inside, right, that sense of esteem, it goes down, okay? Right. So in this sense, right, if the person keeps making those choices based off what they really think, right, and eventually people start to recognize them, I never thought about it that way, but yeah, maybe it is better if we do it that way, okay? Then it expands to now the esteem is coming from the outside, but it matches the internal esteem, you know. And so that's an ideal, to me, that's an ideal path of the development of a son. But when we put it into culture, right, we lose all of our ideals and we get put into a box. So to think of in each of our cultures, each of our genders, right, what are the things where we were seen, right, and appreciated for?
That made me think of it's extrinsic versus intrinsic reward. Have you heard of these terms? So like extrinsic reward is if you do something and people applaud you and they say like good job, do a really cool chart reading and someone's like, oh, that was really good. That would be an extrinsic reward for what you've done. But intrinsic reward would be if you get the reward of doing the thing from the internal experience of doing it alone. So I think what you're talking about is like we have this internal smile or maybe we give ourselves a high five for like doing a good job
Yes.
reading. We're like intrinsic reward on my son, but then the extrinsic reward would be being acknowledged for what we did and getting that high five from someone else. So I love that you brought that up. And then also it makes me think of some cultures are more individualistic, right? And some are more collectivistic. And in some cultures, a person might not even get people, they might not even get a high five for doing anything individualistic. The culture would say like that was like too self-involved, or like what do we do with the sun in cultures that are really collectivistic and they don't let people have an individual expression? I don't even know.
Well,
uh,
I think that's how we get to those cultures being collectivists, is the things that the sun is rewarded for are things that contribute to the group.
oh,
because
interesting.
it's because, right, we all, this is the thing about the sun, right? We can argue whether it's the most powerful in someone's chart or the most, but we can always say that it is central, and we can always say it's the source of vitality. We can always say that, and because of that we all need it, right? The sun is the thing in us that, right, it's without the sun we don't get up in the morning, so we all need it, and we all need to get it somewhere. So whatever a culture does to feed our sun, it's going to determine so much of the direction of our lives. That's why this conversation is so important, to realize that as Americans, okay, our suns have all been tinted, you know, right? And so, and in some ways that tent adds, certain values. In some ways that tent, right, detracts and blots out certain things that are really a part of ourselves. And I think the more we can realize, because part of our esteem comes from our identity of our culture or our country or whatever. So that directly ties it into the sun. And this is why this is interesting, especially as we're getting close to an election, is whether we like it or not, there is a collective national identity, right? And each of us draws some energy and vitality from our relationship to that identity,
Hmm.
you know?
For some reason, I'm thinking of, okay, in Black culture, like there's a Black church right by my house. When I walk by there on Sunday, like all dressed to the nines, and it's like, why is that in Black culture? Like, there's this like dressing up for church thing, that, like, I mean, I guess white people do that too, but I feel like there's much better fashion on the side of like African culture there, and like maybe is that like something in the culture where you get rewarded for kind of really dressing to the nines at church, for example? Whereas, I mean, is that kind of what you're talking about? Is like in some cultures, certain things are given weight as far as like you'll get recognized for doing those things. I'm trying to think of other examples.
No, this is a good example. All right, so if we go back a couple of hundred years, okay, we go back couple hundred years, and we think of African Americans, couple hundred years, a large majority of African Americans were property. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
right, and from the slave owners, right, who wanted to keep it that way. Okay, right, there's question mark whether we were like the same level as them, you know. But now we know that, yeah, maybe we are. Okay. And so, right, and we had astrological charts, and as slaves we had sons, right?
Okay.
We had some need for to have some sense of dignity, or to shine in some way. Okay. Right. And if you think, right, the role that religion played in the slave's life, right, on Sundays, may if their slave owners, which most people were Christian, right, they let them have a day off, and they might be able to put on their best clothes and go to church.
Hmm.
You know?
Interesting.
Right. So this like the sun is powerful. And if we really understood how much of our lives, right, our unconscious energy and lives are devoted to doing what the sun wants, right? The need for it to get the high five or the appreciation, you know, powerful.
Makes me think of prison culture. Like we can look at all different cultures, not just, ethnic cultures, but just like culture, like context cultures of like in prison culture, like people develop sun identities. This guy sells snacks for a living and this guy draws all the tattoos. And, it's like this guy leads the, AA group or whatever. And I think people do take on these like sun identities in many different, in all different cultures, right? Like I like what you're saying. I can't get it out of my head. This like what you get a high five for. This that's like a contagious thought for him. Like you're like memeing me or something like that. But like yeah,
Yeah.
but I see what you're saying is like what well, and if you look at Vedius Fallon's, like he would say it's kind of like what we get acknowledged for, or like our leadership capacity is a big part of the sun. So let's talk about you being a Taurus Gemini cusp sun. It's like you're a cusper, right?
Yeah. Yeah. If
You're a
you
Gemini. We know you're a Gemini, but
okay, good.
you're on the
Good.
cusp. You're on the cusp. So it's like, what's a Gemini in the ninth house get accolades for? I mean, I would say that like thinking and being a teacher and being a professor.
Okay, so yeah, you're right on it, but to me, when I think of astrology, I think one of the greatest gifts astrology has given to me, it's given me a framework that allows me to align my inner self and my outer self, inner self and outer self, right? And I think of an alignment, right, is the core of who we are, the roots of who we are is our inner self, but it shows up in the world as our outer self, right? And to me, it's like the more they're aligned, oh my God, it's like more efficient. Things run more smoothly. Okay. So what we are talking about is we grow up, and as we're growing up, we're not really educated on our inner self because we need so much energy developing our outer self. So it's very easy for the outer self sun to not be aligned with the inner self sun. Okay, the outer self sun is again whatever scraps we could get of a high five or a pat on the back from our poor parents, right, and our the people around us. That's how the outer self is going to develop, and sometimes it's aligned with the inner self, and sometimes it's not.
Like we need you to look like a professor is what you're trying to say. like
Well,
like
that it right. If I right, if I was born white and tall and lanky and I needed glasses, it'd be much more easier for my ninth house Gemini
ah
sun, okay, for that inner self to be appreciated, right, to get the high five and the pat on the back. And I think of right people who meet me, right, and they know a little bit of astrology, and I tell them, the sun in my chart is not very strong. They say that can't be. You're a professional football player, blah 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 blah. Right? But the reality is, right, the external sun was being fed so much. The internal sun, no, because when I try to share my philosophy, right, the message, right, shut up and run, right, right, shut up and run.
oh
So
I think you were self noting like you were busy running, you were building power. I feel like while you were running, it's like it wasn't for naught. But anyways, but I heard what
but
you're
I
saying.
wasn't I wasn't building power until I retired. But this is the idea. Power, that's another good sun word. And we can build power into ourselves by doing what our sun and our chart suggest. So yeah, so I didn't feel powerful because I hadn't taken the ninth house Gemini behaviors to make myself more powerful. And as soon as I retired, what did I start doing? Two things that I always kind of wanted to do, but I never did. I started reading and I started traveling.
Oh, okay, ninth house there too. Yeah.
I started reading and I started traveling, and my whole life changed. I tell people I felt more alive in the 3 months after retiring from football than I did the previous 27 years of my life.
Wow.
That's a
Sounds like you were
sun. That's a
mentally
sun for me.
underfunded there. Like, it's like you're physically, being able to express, but that you're so mental. And that was so it's interesting. I want to talk about this. There are African professors, though. I mean, like it's like, yeah, you didn't have that expression. You didn't know that you were a little professor basically when you were young, so you didn't look like one maybe, but like let's say your parents knew your chart and they had said like, oh, the sun in the ninth house, like we got a little teacher here, and they would tell you that and feed you that information from the time you were young, like maybe you would have looked more like. But what's an African professor look like? I mean, there are tons of them.
Well, we say professor, but in the conventional path for African American with the ninth house sun conjunct Jupiter is to become a preacher.
Okay, that's
So
why is that? Why, I guess that why, maybe it's what you were
this
saying.
is this is an example, right? If you grow up as an African American, right, and you're sharing your opinion, right, the people around you, they're gonna say preach,
Okay.
right? If you're gonna write more, right, I'm saying more in a white community, they're gonna nickname you the professor,
Oh, see,
right?
that's a
Because that's
really
the
good example of the cultural differences that people are growing up in. That's a beautiful example.
yeah.
Yeah. So I want to let me talk. Okay, this isn't a side, but okay, like I just had my birthday yesterday, and my son is like at zero Scorpio and like in the sixth house, and so I work as an occult, author or whatever, hermeticist. So it's like, what would an African? Because you don't see a lot of goth African people. It's like gothic culture is lacking. I mean, I know a few, but
Criminals, they become criminals.
oh, really?
Mhm.
But what if it was in the sixth house of work? I just
Then
want.
they really become. They find their ass in prison doing manual labor.
Or maybe, yeah, maybe they're drawing the tattoos as a job. No, I mean,
No, but if we think about Saturn, right? If we think about Saturn, okay, right, and we can put this in a cultural context, right? Someone hits hard times, right? Someone, right, and we think of a white person hitting. Again, these are generalizations. We think of a white person hitting hard times, right? Oh, they have to file bankruptcy.
uh-uh.
I don't know anyone, right, from where I grew up that ever filed bankruptcy, right? They turned to crime,
Okay.
right? Right. And you can make the argument that bankruptcy is crime. Okay, but we won't we won't
Yeah,
go.
that's like the white collar version of it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, exactly.
Fascinating. Man, okay, so I love this. Okay, let's think about other suns in both cultures. So like let's say it was sun in Capricorn in the 10th house. Black culture versus white culture.
Mhm.
Like the white culture version seems to me like a business owner, corporate business owner. But what about a, an African person with sun in Capricorn and 10?
The deacon in the church.
Okay. See, I was not far off when I said the church thing because I feel like when I go by the church, I'm just like, this is a freaking amazing part of Black culture. Like, okay, the deacon in the church. Okay,
Because
okay.
what in the church is the one, right? If you think of where, right, the religion, because 10th house Capricorn, right, the rules, right, and I think in white America, capitalism, government, the rules, okay, but in again, generalizing African American culture, it's changed now. But when I was growing up, right, it was the church. And so if you're American and you're looking for an expression of that, one place that's easy, accessible to find it is in the church. There's other places, but that's an easy one.
Yeah, well, like I think if we were going to push the envelope, we could say there are Black Congress people and, corporate business people, but we don't see that stereotypically, right? We're not fed that image, whereas we're fed that
Because
image among white people.
I think because it's at least at this point in time, it's unconventional. You'd need some Uranus and some good luck, some Jupiter in order that a white person wouldn't necessarily need to reach the same position.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I mean, Kamala is doing pretty good. I'm not a big politics person. I don't know much, but I do know Kamala is running for president. So I don't know her
Well,
chart though.
yeah. So she's. So there's the chart, and then there's the right what someone has done with the chart, and you see that by where they are in life. And so she's a Libra Sun, fifth house Libra Sun, opposing an 11th house Aries Moon.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
So right, that balance of knowing when to like to yell and when to step back, right, when to take the lead, and right, and that's something that she right a potential that she's had, but in order for her to become as successful as she's has become, that in order to do that, she's had to have got a lot of practice figuring that out.
Yeah, interesting.
You know?
Yeah, that Aries moon, I can see in the 11th, you'd be like feisty enough in the public sphere to really go for something big, you know. That's a warrior spirit, honestly. So okay, that's a good example. Well, okay, there are a lot of black athletes. Like if we were talking about, even female like track and field or you know, so like the
Part of this,
Aries version, definitely athletes.
well, but if you think this is where everyone wins, right? If you get the angry athletic, right, militant African Americans into sports, right?
Yeah, that's
white,
true.
people, white people are safer.
Oh my God. I was a little worried with Mars squaring your Mars. I didn't know if I was going to be safe, but I do know that we're friends. So,
Well, I have a lot of outlets. My son is Mars is at 22 degrees
oh,
Cancer. My wife's Mars 22 degrees Cancer. So, um, and it's fascinating when the Mars gets to 20 degrees, 18 to 22 degrees of cardinal signs because it's activating everyone in this house. It's
ah,
activating it's activating all of our Marses,
oh man.
and if we weren't aware, we might kill each other, but we are aware, right? So we laugh more about it. You know?
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. Yeah. Yeah, I'm in a Mars return too. Like Mars is square natally is square my sun, and I'm just like crocheting like a mad woman. So you don't have to be too alarmed. But okay, let's talk about I like to do these examples. What about Taurus, like in both sun in Taurus in African culture? I know this is challenging,
So
but it's actually we're learning a lot.
no, it's good. Um, I think of the first word that comes to mind is conservative.
Okay, interesting. What does
Yeah.
it look like in African culture to be conservative?
So this I think this would apply to any minority culture, but there's an extra added challenge when you have to be conservative and you're the minority,
Yeah, that's
right?
why it's
Because
kind of hard for me to think of because I feel like minorities are a revolution in and of themselves, you
yeah.
know?
So typically there it requires more effort to put the majority at ease.
I just think a lot of,
Or I would say it would be the avoidance of the other. So I can imagine a tourist that grows up in the South, in a predominantly African American town, and they say I'm content never to have to deal with the white man.
a lot of
I
Tauruses
could feel
deal with
that.
isms like capitalism, racism. A lot of them deal with the isms part of it, like the structures of, I don't know. I remember doing a reading. I'm not breaking confidentiality, but a reading for a really Taurus black woman, and she was very like, but Uranus is going over that. God, I shouldn't talk about these things on TV. Well, it's not breaking confidentiality, but she was just really into racism as a cultural construct. And then I also worked with somebody who had a Moon Mars conjunction in Taurus, and she was also really into racism. But I mean,
So what comes to mind? What comes to mind when you say that is related to what I'm saying. So one side of it is right is someone who might say, I don't want to bother with it. It's just easier to not have to deal with it, right? But that would come from a sensitivity to racism,
yeah,
right? But on the other side, right? Because I have a good friend, African American, he's got a lot of Taurus energy, and he like refuses to do anything, okay, that would make him a target of racism.
interesting.
Doesn't smoke, he doesn't drink, he like dresses really nice, drives a really nice car, right? And I would say that also comes from a sensitivity to racism. That's why I say it requires more effort to put the other at ease,
Mm,
right? That can only come from a sensitivity to isms.
interesting.
Because to me, at the bedrock of Taurus is about like ease, simplicity, calm, right? And
Yeah.
if I go somewhere about my Taurus and I'm like, oh, all right, I walk in the room and all these judgments are gonna come up about, it's like I'd rather just not go, right?
Mhm.
Or I have to dress nice and do all these things to make sure I put all these crackers, I mean these white people at ease.
Dude, all I know is I'm a tasty cracker. No, I don't know.
Hey, I love crackers. I'm married a couple.
I was gonna say you're married to one, but I wasn't allowed to say that because I'm not allowed to joke about crackers. Um,
I am.
I know, yeah, you get to because you can reclaim all the cracker jokes you want. So well, okay, so there could be also an Earth, yeah. But I'm like wanting to break the stereotypes and be like, we could have like a financial planner who's black, or like you said, he's all dressed to the nines, like that's kind of Taurus, like textiles and
Even like
stuff.
we say yeah, it's true in a financial planner, right? But if I went to a Taurus financial planner, right, he would tell me about how, right, and I'm totally stereotyping, right? He would tell me about that I should dress a little bit nicer because the white people will give me more money if they
So
so
the
but
Tauruses are focused on money, like no matter who they
that
are.
is good. That's good advice. It won't work for someone who's got Uranus in the second. But so yes, we can say financial planners. And again, we're stereotyping, Might not
Yeah.
have to find a Taurus with a strong Uranus. Okay, right. And they can tell me
Yeah.
they
Well,
can
and you and I are doing something really cool, which is talking about what stereotypically people would see as culture. Because the astrological reader kind of has to work with the stereotypes of like you're growing up in this culture, your plant is growing, and people will stereotype you. As you grow, and then you have to kind of fight those and be like, well, my spirit is kicking the stereotypes ass, and like I'm going to be a rich black person, or I'm going to be like a congressperson, right? So we're also teaching people to break through stereotypes and be like, no, that chart can be whatever it wants to be, regardless of the culture it's in. It has to find appropriate context to express itself. What do you think about a person who's African moving themselves out of African, context into white context in order to access certain, you know, information or, you know, like
there would have to be a strong Sagittarius, Jupiter, Uranus, Aquarius in order to fund to fund that behavior.
Hmm. Interesting.
Right?
Well, astrologers are largely, there's a lot of white astrologers, and you kind of hang out with the white astrologers so that you can develop your sun in the ninth. I mean,
Well, but again, again, in my chart, I have strong ninth house Jupiter signature. So the curiosity and the motivation to interact and experience other cultures is very powerful. You know, so there's for a chart like again, someone who has a big ninth house, a lot of Jupiter stuff, it's necessary, right? I'm talking to Africa, right? Any culture, right? If you got a lot of Jupiter stuff, you need to experience other cultures. You
hmm,
know, it's a it's a
interesting.
vitamin. It's a it's a vitamin
Yeah.
for them.
What about a black person with the sun in the second house?
Hmm. That's difficult, right? The way that I understand one issue of the second house is a sensitivity to a feeling of, do I have what it takes?
Hmm.
Do I have what it takes? I think of a story I like to tell about the second house is, and I think if there's three general ways to make money. Okay, and they're directly tied to the earth images. So one is raw materials. Okay, um, right, like thinking cannabis, right? Someone who grows the cannabis, they have the raw material at
Okay.
second house. All right, the next sixth house, that's processing. Okay, processing, right? People turn it into oil, right? And they get paid to do it. I know, I'm in the business, right? Processing is huge, right? And then there's services connected to the product, right? Which are retail, and so these are right the second, sixth, and the 10th house. So these are potential ways. So, but the first one, I imagine someone has, he's got a bunch of land, and he's like, I have all this land. Okay, there's a potential, right, to develop raw materials. Okay, but it's just a potential, right? He has to do something with that land. And so I think the sun in the second house, there's an awareness of the potential, right? But it's just an awareness of the potential. Something has to be done with it, right? And if we're we're keyed to potential, we also are keyed to, there's a potential that, right, I might not know how to do it. I might not be able to figure it out. So it's easy for, in that sense, for someone to rest on their laurels as, I have all this land, right? But it's just potential value. And so the second house to me very much is tied to self-esteem, but the real life practical self-esteem of, do I have what it takes?
Hmm.
Right. And so my son has got 5 planets in the second house, right? He's an African American little boy, 5 planets in the second house. Right. One thing is, right, shoe collectors. Okay, I'm totally stereotyping, right?
Hmm.
But I imagine an African American, right, son in the second, right, that I get energy from the stuff I have, ideally because it's a reflection of my true values. Right, so the positive side, right, someone doesn't is not into sports, but he notices, right, the cool kids collect shoes, so he collects shoes. He has all these great shoes, but they don't do anything for it. Okay, they're worth a lot of money, but they don't do anything for him. Okay, and say, right, like my son who loves sports, right, he's always looking at the shoes the players are wearing, and imagine, he's Pisces, imagining himself making plays with those shoes. Okay, he looks at his shoe collection, right? He gets some energy, right? He gets confidence that he can do it. All right. So my son, when he was 2.5, okay, we had a place set in the backyard. It had one of those like rickety bridges, and it was his first time going across the bridge, and he took one step, and he froze. Okay. And I was thinking to myself, dude, like, we're not going to put you on a bridge that's going to fall, right? But in his mind, right, do I have what it takes to make it across this bridge? And I started to get like macho dad, like, you're not going to be afraid of this bridge. And then I remembered all his planets in the second house. And so I spent a half an hour, going really slowly with him, helping him develop the confidence that he had what it take to make the next step, because I knew in his life this thought is going to come up over and over and over and over again. And if he
Wow.
can tolerate the mental process, right, he won't jump to the cheap fix, you know? All
Interesting.
right.
I want to give you a high five for being a philosopher as a dad,
Yeah.
because your
All right,
son's
can't
in
help it.
nine. That's awesome. Okay, well, so I'm not having a hard time at all imagining the sun in the fifth house of African culture. Like, I feel like artists are all over in Black culture. I mean, don't you think that African culture celebrates artists, like
Hundred
Sun and
percent,
Five.
hundred
Yeah,
100%, right? Right. It's this comes back to kind of the thing with athletes, okay? Right? Is performers, right? If we see the ways that African Americans broke into the mainstream, it was always some fifth house context, right?
yeah.
On a stage or on a football or on a field or on a court,
Yeah, that makes
right?
sense. Like, I think that's cool that there are some things we're identifying that, you know, culture at large really celebrates in all culture. You know, it's kind of like in the circus, and anyone's beautiful in the circus as long as you got a skill, you know, if
Yeah.
you got a
Yeah.
talent. And that's like fifth house stuff, you know.
Mhm. So, do you? If I'm going to say a name, and I'm curious if you recognize it, I doubt you will, but I'm going to do it anyway. Have you ever heard the name Chicken George?
No.
Okay, so it's my poor kids. So there was a series, I think it was the late '70s, that came out. I think it was on PBS called Roots. And it's like
Yeah.
this long like journey from Kunta Kinte, right, from capturing them in Africa all the way like close to the current day. All right, and so in the slave days, right, Chicken George, he was one of the slaves who had a gift or a skill with helping the chickens fight, you know? And so the slave owner would take Chicken George to all the chicken fights and he would win. And so Chicken George is total fifth house son, right? Chicken George got special privileges, right? Got to leave the plantation, right? Got more high fives than the other ones. Yeah.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, that's a cool concept that if you have a special skill, no matter what culture you're in, you know, and I think we see that in special charts. Like there are charts that are just really something else. You know what I mean? And I think in any culture, like you really are going to get noticed if you're really something, you know, just you are just,
Yeah.
I feel like that's how you got noticed when you were young. Is your
Well, but
charts
again,
epic?
there's inner and there's outer, and this is what's tricky, but we can really focus it on the sun, right? Because people can recognize, again, the high five, the pat on the back, we can recognize it. And if we studied a little bit of astrology, we know what sign our sun is in, and we know what house our sun is in. And also, we studied a little bit more, we know the aspects that it makes. And if we start to, in our mind, think about either memories, think about what's going on now, or think about what we would like to see in the future to align the inner sun with the outer sun, is to appreciate the times in the past, the times in the present, and the hopeful times in the future where the high five or the pat on the back was directly related to the expression of the sign and the house of our natal suns.
Okay, we have 3 minutes, and I almost think that this is a good place to kind of wrap it up because I want people to know this point that you're making, which is such a good point that I've never heard an astrologer say, which is if we have an internal guide towards leadership or some ability, according to our sun, they would call this praxis in the ancient times, which is our practical and business oriented task as led by a belief in ourself and in whatever that if we align our look or our outer self to that internal self, like Ricky said, it's a lot more efficient. The world can see us. We can become who we're trying to become. And I think that's such an important point that people should hopefully take from today is look the part. You know, in remediation, there's you know when it talks about sun problems, it's like not being recognized, not being seen, not being acknowledged,
Yeah.
and you know some of the remedies there are like get your wardrobe correct, you know, get photos of yourself. I mean, having talk about manifestation. If you have a photographer take a photo of you being your son in the house and sign it's in, like all of a sudden
Yes.
we
Yes.
visioned it for the world, you know.
Yes. That's beautiful. That is so beautiful. Oh, and but I think to add the point of this conversation is to embrace the idea of that sun is something inside that is attempting to radiate outwards, and one of the or several of the layers that it's manifesting through, right? It's culture, it's ethnicity, it's gender, and so being mindful, right, of do because that's the outer work, right? How can I best radiate this what's on the inside through the external vehicles, right?
Yeah.
Because there's going to be certain things, right, that as much as I want to shine, it ain't going to work, right, based on the time we live in right now. So what ways, right, what ways will work?
Well, okay, I want to add, and then we do have to go. But okay, I want to honor what you're saying. Yeah, go with what will work according to what's currently manifested. But if your spirit is trying to kick ass on something, you can manifest a new vision for the world that's never existed. If in your culture there's something that's not acknowledged, create the visions for that thing. Create the visions. Show the world what you're seeing, and like I think people can do it. I think it's both.
I agree. I agree. And I think it is both, but I think the path to doing it that way is to appreciate, right, how you're going to be seen by other people, right? So that you have more conscious ability to tweak that.
Nice.
You know, it's like the more that I own that I'm a philosopher and I'm going to say unconventional things, okay, then I'm not shocked when people are like, what the hell are you talking about, right? I can embrace it. I can embrace it and use it and say it might be weird to hear this coming from someone that looks like me, but there it is, okay? I can work with it instead of being up against it.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for today, Ricky. I've realized how much I've missed you. I just love our conversations. I really do.
Me
Thank you.
too. I look forward to next week. Yep.
All right. See
Thank
ya.
you.
Bye.